Now, I did see Captain America Civil War, but I have a few more movies I saw before it that I haven't gotten to review yet, so let's get started. So first up is The Huntsman Winter's War. The trailer for this movie was so confusing. I had no idea if it was a prequel or if it was a sequel or what it was. Well, it turns out it's a little bit of both. The movie starts off as a sort of origin story of the Huntsman, as well as the evil witch's sister. Emily Blunt plays the Queen's sister in this movie, and because of a tragic event, she gains crazy ice powers, and then decides to rule the kingdom by killing everyone, taking the kids, and trying to force them into not loving each other. And yeah, she becomes so vengeful that because I can't love, no one else can. Yeah. Well, it turns out Chris Hemsworth, the Huntsman, and Jessica Chastain both grew up in this environment. They became warriors from this kid army. But despite the rule not being able to love anyone, they fell in love. Of course, something tragic happens, and now we jump 5 years into the future after the events of the first movie, and now Emily Blunt is looking for the mirror that her sister used to have, because it has some great power, and yeah, that's the whole basis of the movie. Now, I will admit this, I liked the first movie. I liked Snow White and the Huntsman. There's still some weak moments in it, some things that I didn't like about it, but for the most part I thought it was above average. And so I was curious to see this movie, and after a lot of negative reviews, I have to say it isn't as terrible as I thought it would be. I still was entertained overall. But then again, I do like fantasy movies, and so even the most cliched fantasy movies, which this is definitely a very cliched by the books fantasy film, but even the most cliched can still get a like out of me. So basically, I'm a little biased with fantasy. I like Chris Hemsworth as the Huntsman, and despite a lot of people saying that he's a bad character to be a leading role, I didn't mind him as the leading role for this movie. I thought Jessica Chastain did a really good job as well, and the chemistry between those two was pretty decent. There's also a company of dwarves that play more of the comedic elements of the movie, and I thought they were pretty funny for the most part. Overall, the movie visually looks good, and the visual effects is actually handled nicely. The action is decent. There's a lot of things to like about the movie and feel fine about the movie. But there are definitely some things to easily hate about the movie. For one, and yeah, I know this is the trailer's fault and not the movie's fault, so I'm not going to blame the movie severely for it, but the trailer gives out way too much. There's so much about the movie that it would be more beneficial if the trailer didn't show as many scenes as it did. For one, the trailer was all about Charlize Theron's character, you know, the villain from the first movie, the villain that was supposed to be dead. Yeah, she's all throughout that trailer to the point where it almost seems like she's one of the main characters or the main antagonist of the film. I guess in a way she kind of is subtly, I guess. She's only in the last act of the film. Yeah, all those scenes that you see her in the trailer, except for maybe a flashback towards the beginning of the movie, it's all from the last act, the climax of the film. So yeah, this trailer gives away the climax. Plus, when you realize that, and you realize there's a lot more of some of these other characters later on in the movie, there's some points in the movie where it makes it look like certain characters die off. And you realize, you know what, they can't be dead yet because I saw them in other scenes in the trailer and those scenes haven't happened yet. Yeah, this movie does that. But even with the characters supposedly dying or making it look like they die, I never felt like they were truly in danger and never felt they were actually dead. And some of that could be from the trailer, but some of it feels like from the movie itself, where it feels like, nah, they're not dead. I don't buy it. Now, I liked a lot of the throwbacks to some of the creatures that were in the first film are showed occasionally in this movie. You know, all the CGI woodland creatures, the fairies, and all the other weird, almost creatures that have plants growing out of them or flowers. Yeah, some of those are in this movie, and I thought, oh, that was a nice little touch, and I liked it. They actually looked good, just like they looked as good in the first one. But just like the first one, they try to have this one new creature, and they try to see it in a different perspective, or have a different look to it that you might not expect. And that is goblins in this movie. The goblins look like apes, basically. They're apes with horns and gold claws. Now, I like the gold aspects of them, because in this film they're seen as greedy creatures that try to take all these gold and all the shiny things and hoard it for themselves. And so it is an obvious sort of characterization that they would have gold on them and have like these golden horns and claws and stuff. But it does show their greed, and I like that aspect of them. But what I don't like about it is they act like apes, they look like apes, and it's a little weird because that's not what you see a goblin as. Again, it's one of those things that's trying to have a different interpretation of a goblin, but sometimes it's too far-fetched to believe them as goblins. Also, this whole theme of the movie, the whole goal, the whole conflict, is all about love. And I know a lot of fairy tales have love involved where it's either the main conflict or it has something to do with the major theme of the movie or story. And I get that. This is a big part of this movie, but sometimes when love is involved that deeply with the movie, sometimes things can get cheesy, and for this movie there was no exception. There are definitely things in it that are a little too cheesy, at least for my taste. Also, there are definitely ideas in this movie that's too tacked on, too forced into the film, such as the resurrection of the evil queen, played by Charlize Theron. Yeah, the way they go about it is kind of, well, I mean, it makes sense in a way, but it feels too obvious of a choice. It feels too generalized, if that makes any sense. Instead of going into great detail, they're like, oh yeah, my soul kind of went into the mirror and now I'm able to be free once you said the words or something. It doesn't quite make sense. It's just sort of thrown in there for movie logic. Also, after watching the first movie again, after I've seen this movie, I realized there was a lot of inconsistencies between the movies. Basically, there's a lot of things in the second movie that either they forget about from the first one, don't bother mentioning from the first one, or decide to do something completely different as a different interpretation, and it usually does not work in this movie. It just feels inconsistent. Overall, the movie did have some entertainment value to it. I almost thought about giving it a 3, but because of the inconsistencies, because of the weird look for the goblins, and because of just some of the cheesiness to it, I just couldn't give it a fresh score. So I'm going to give The Huntsman, Winter's War, 2.5 stars. So did you see The Huntsman, The Winter's War? What did you think about it? Go ahead and comment. And if you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and check out my movie reviews of 2015 and 2016. As always, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was Just My Opinion.